Lev Emunah Vitality Circle, Class 20. This is a workshop on creating miracles and personal redemption, personal geulah. We're drawing from the Kabbalistic secrets of Pesach and the night of the Seder. And what I want you to come out from this class enjoying the experience of a clear knowing of the framework, the elements that are needed in order to create personal redemption, real transformation in your life, and appreciating the deeper meaning of it Kabbalistically and how it fits into Pesach and the Seder, how it's drawn from Pesach and the Seder, so that when you come to the Seder, you can actually experience it for yourself instead of on just knowing it intellectually. You want to experience it for yourself. And so when you're ready to begin by imagining for yourself, or with your eyes closed or with your eyes open. In fact, I would invite you to try this out with your eyes open and even write it down in your notes in front of you. What is it going to feel like for you at the end of this class when you have a grasp of this? When you understand for yourself clearly the framework of creating personal transformation, personal redemption and geulah, and experiencing miracles, creating miracles in your life. What are 3 points, 3 ways that that's going to support you in your life? How is that valuable and important to you now? And what would be your general state of mind, or specifically get clear on the feeling, the emotion that you would probably feel once you realize that this has been fulfilled, that this question has been answered, that this intention has been materialized? How do you think you might apply these secrets that we will speak about today in your life? And what would it feel like or look like once that's fulfilled? Now, if you were to ask yourself in this moment, as I think about how awesome it's going to be once I'm experiencing the answer to this question, once I'm experiencing the solution to this problem, once I'm experiencing the benefits and the real transformation that this will lead me to, what is the feeling that that brings up inside of you? Maybe a feeling of excitement, anticipation, curiosity, empowerment, readiness, maybe something else. Maybe there's just one word that encapsulates all of that energy that you're feeling right now as you focused on the great benefits this will bring you in your life. How will this change your Pesach? How will this change your holiday? How will this change the next month? How will this change your year? And when you've gotten that, even a general sense of it, allow that to propel you forward, focusing and aligning throughout this class and absorbing it consciously and subconsciously so that it becomes your reality. Allowing yourself to be that version of you that is experiencing that outcome. I'm going to try something new today. Throughout the class, I'm going to give you an opportunity after different segments to kind of summarize for yourself, just in order to support you all in taking the notes. And we're going to give you like a prompt or two or like a question just to summarize certain segments. Okay, let's begin. How awesome is this? We're speaking about creating miracles, creating real transformation, creating, as the Baal Shem Tov taught, geulah pratit, a personal geulah. That the collective geulah comes from the personal geulah of each and every one of us. Each and every one of us is a universe unto its own. And we might think that we need to fix this one and that one and this government and that government and this, this people and that people and whatever, in order to bring the world to its rectification. But ultimately, all of that is fine and wonderful. We will be the best source of transformation for others once we create that transformation for ourselves. And so let's speak about miracles. This Shabbat is called Shabbat HaGadol, the big Shabbat. That means that all the other Shabbatot of the year, relative to this Shabbat, is a small Shabbat. If you call this Shabbat the big Shabbat, then all the other Shabbatot of the year are small relative to it, next to it. Question is, in which way is this Shabbat big? What's the bigness of this Shabbat? Is it longer? Is it more intense? In which way is it bigger than all the other Shabbatot? What makes this Shabbat big? This Shabbat, as our Chazal, our sages teach us, is the Shabbat when there was a big miracle that took place. A big miracle. Again, what was big about that miracle and relative to the miracle of the Exodus, the miracle of coming out of Egypt, and the miracle of Kriyat Yamsuf, the splitting of the sea? What miracle can be considered big? Why is it considered a big miracle? What was the big miracle of this Shabbat? It was 4 days before we were commanded to bring the sacrifice of the Pesach sacrifice. 4 days beforehand, we are commanded to take aside the sheep, take it aside for yourself, to dedicate it and to watch it, make sure that it doesn't get blemished. And so on this Shabbat, it was a Shabbat on that year. We all took the idol of the Egyptians, the Egyptian god, Aries, the sign of Aries, and we're being asked, imagine in India, all of a sudden, all the Jews in India, all of a sudden, all these Jews, they take the cows and they ask them, what are you going to do with this cow? Oh, we're going to slaughter it. We're going to bring it as a sacrifice. God commanded us. So it caused a lot of turmoil. God is going to take us out of Egypt in the next 4 days, the next 5 days. And so he commanded us to prepare this offering, this sacrifice, the idol of the Egyptians, what they believed to be the source of their power, right? That's their idol. They believed it to be the strongest sign from all the 12 constellations, from all the 12 signs of the in the astrology, the astrological signs. They believe this to be the source of all power and all manifesting. And here we're taking that idol, that symbol, and we are sacrificing it to the source of all the powers, the source, that one that created all the constellations, the one that created all the forces and all the energies in the whole universe, the one that's behind it all, the one that's in the control room, the only actual power and control, the only actual power in the universe. And so they went to their families and they went to their friends and they went to their parents, and they went to Paro and they said, you got to let them go. You got to let them go. the Jews, they said to them that Hashem is going to kill in the final plague the firstborn. So it was the firstborn of all the Egyptian families that they were most concerned. They were most concerned about their life, and they went and they really urged Paro to let them go. And a whole conflict, a whole civil war went on that Shabbat. And the firstborns in every family went and they killed, in all their arguments, they went and they killed each other out. And they hit and they hurt because of this argument. How can you put our lives at risk? And this is what the David says in the Psalms and the Tehillim. He says in the verse that says, "Lemakem Mitzrayim bivchorehem ki le'olam chazdo," to the one who hit the Egyptians through their firstborns, because his kindness is forever and ever. Eternal. What does it mean through their firstborns? With their firstborns, what does that mean? So one might say it's referring to the final plague, the firstborns that died or in that night that Hashem killed. But the verse doesn't say that. The verse says that the one who hit them, the Egyptians, through their firstborns. And so it's referring to this Shabbat, this tremendous miracle. So this is a miracle of nullifying the belief system of idol worship, nullifying those beliefs that block the belief in Enod Milvado. Okay, when we give power to forces outside of Hashem, when we make ourselves the victim to forces outside of Hashem, that's what this Shabbat is all about. It's a big Shabbat, meaning that it's a Shabbat where there is a revelation of bigness. What is bigness? It's miracle. Any miracle, every miracle is the aspect of big, expansiveness. You're transcending the limitations, the constricting limitations of the physical, the constricting limitations of the past. You're moving out of that into a place of expanded space, of less limitations, infinite potential, infinite possibilities. Now, there's a very wonderful, very interesting Zohar. I just came across this yesterday. The Zohar says, and this is a famous midrash as well, that when the Jews were at the sea, that the angel of the Egyptians, his name is Rahav, Reish Hev Bet, is the name of the angel. It's an angel that is destructive, a destructive angel. And this angel of that is kind of like the channel of energy for the Egyptian nation, came before Hashem, the source of everything in the universe, and said, how can you drown my nation at sea and allow this other nation to survive and to live? One of them is not better than the other. And he said to them these famous words, Halalu of the avodah zarah, v'halalu of the avodah zarah. The Jews at that time got to a place where there were many similarities with the Egyptians, being stuck and swallowed up in that place for a couple of centuries. And they were also idol worshippers. And they also had other things that were going on by them that were also similar to the destructive ways of the Egyptians. And one might say, okay, it's referring to the Erev Rav, but not necessarily. This angel of the Egyptian nation came and said to Hashem, why would you save this nation and drown the other nation? And so there was a lot of din, right? That's called din energy. That's judgment energy, right? The worthiness to live, the worthiness to be saved, the worthiness to experience a miracle. Are you worthy or are you not worthy? Oh, well, they're not worthy. Why would you give them a miracle? And so there are two responses. One of them is that Hashem said, the first thing that Hashem said, well, it's the merit of their forefather Abraham. Okay, and that's the power of the morning. Abraham is the power of the morning, of the morning that we have every morning in the morning. I don't mean the morning with MOU, like we teach in the good morning exercise. I mean every morning when the sun rises. And the power of Abraham is that proactive power of Emunah that we'll speak about. It's the proactive power of moving forward in the morning, materializing the light that you feel in your heart and externalizing it, living with it, living through it. That's the power of Emunah that Abraham came and taught to the world. And so this is the power that they have. So that's the first response. The power of Abraham, the power of the morning, which is the power of chesed, kindness. Meaning that I'm not living a scarcity mentality. I'm not living a mentality of limitations, of constrictedness, of judgment. I'm living a mentality of abundance. That's chesed, kindness, love, moving forward. You know, the energy that you kind of feel, anyone that experiences being outside in the morning in nature, it's kind of like the whole creation, the whole world comes to life. And there's a flourishing, a thriving energy, a moving forward, creating a new day. Instead of going back to your home, what you do at night, going back to your home, getting comfortable in your own room, in your own bed. No, here in the morning, it's all about moving out and creating a new day. That's the energy of the morning. People that experience depression, despair, one of the main telltale signs is their mornings are very different. I don't even have to describe to you how specifically they're different, but I'm sure you can all take a moment and ask yourself, in which ways are the mornings of someone who doesn't have real passion and zest in life, how are their mornings different? So that virtue of zest is what we're looking for, and that's what we find in the morning, in the nature. And that's the aspect of Abraham. That's Emunah, the possibilities, the hope, moving forward with optimism. And that leads to the next thing that Hashem said about, Hashem said to Moshe, he said, why are they crying out to me? Tell them to move forward. This is something we're going to get into the class for the 7th day of Pesach, but this is also going to tie into what we're going to speak about tonight. It's that Emunah power, which transcends whether you're worthy or not. It could be that both the Jews and the Egyptians, they seem equally unworthy of being saved. And yet there's a power here that goes beyond worthiness. When you tap into the power of Emunah, you create a miracle, a personal redemption that has nothing to do of whether you're worthy and to what degree you're worthy or not worthy. Okay, that's the nature of miracles. And that's called Gadol. Gadol in the Torah is a word that represents this energy of chesed. When we say the midah of geulah from the word gadol is a synonym for the word for chesed. When David HaMelech, when he praises Hashem for all the 7 sfirot, in the verse that he says, Lecha Adonai hageulah v'hagevurah v'tiferet v'hanetzach v'ahod. We say it every morning in the prayer. To you, Hashem, is geulah, greatness, gevurah, strength, and tiferet, that beauty, and victory, netzach, and hod. And then he says, to you, Hashem, is kingship, right? He goes through all the 7 lower sfirot in that piece there, that verse. And so when he's referring to the first of those 7 sfirot, the 7 lower sfirot, the sphere of chesed, kindness, he refers to it as geulah, gadol. And so gadol, big or great, is an aspect of chesed, expansiveness. moving beyond limitations, expanding beyond your limitations, moving forward without any limitations. If you were to stop now for a moment and ask yourself, what was the most significant insight or takeaway from our class so far? What would that be? I'll give you all a minute to write that. What is your takeaway from our class so far? You don't have to write a whole sentence. It could be a word or two. Now, moving forward. Miracles are an expression, a revelation of chesed energy, which is moving beyond worthiness. Worthiness is always determined by the past. Based on my past, based on who I am now, based on what I've done or what I haven't done, am I worthy of this? Or am I limited from this? But when I'm able to transcend that, I'm able to create something new in this moment, something that is more expansive than anything that I could have ever imagined with my imagination, with my limiting beliefs of the past. And so when we speak about this Shabbat as being the big Shabbat, it's the Shabbat of big miracles. Every Shabbat is an aspect of miracles. Who says this? Rabbi Pinchas of Koretz. I actually printed it out for myself, and I didn't bring it to paper. Just a second. Rabbi Pinchas of Koretz explains this aspect of Gadol, the big miracles. And the miracle is basically nullifying the idol of the Egyptians, which is the block of that Eno Nuvado, that miracle consciousness. And that's what took place in the Shabbat. And so what we want to do is we want to get clear on what are these elements that create big greatness, chesed, kindness, a personal redemption. The whole energy of Pesach is the sphere of chesed in Kabbalah. It's what rectifies the sphere of chesed, of kindness for the whole year. What's called dro'a yemina in the Aramaic of the Zohar, which means the right arm. The right arm is the sphere of chesed. The right arm of God is outstretched, creating miracles. Why is the right arm? The right arm is the aspect of chesed. It's the kindness, the expansiveness. And so how do we create that for ourselves? And what are the main elements of the formula that we can notice and practice and embody and in the night of the Seder and take with us for the rest of the year? So the first thing we want to speak about is the mindset change that takes slaves and creates Bnei Chorim, someone who is truly free. The night of the Seder, we speak about how we were slaves, and there is a slave mentality, and we were freed. The question, the very interesting question, the Rebbe of Lubavitch, the last Lubavitch Rebbe asked this question. He said, I don't understand. He said, we were taken out of Egypt. We were freed from the Egyptians as being slaves to the Egyptians, but then we became slaves to God. So how is that making us free? How are we free? Now we have all these 613 mitzvot and all these other things and this whole lifestyle. Which way are we free? And so he explains a very important point, and this is really the beginning of all freedom, is understanding this mindset, a change. He explains this is something that was also echoed in the words of Maslow said this. What one can be, one must be. What that means is if you look at the different elements of creation, this is the way the Lubavitch Rebbe explained it. You have, Kabbalistically, you have the inanimate objects on the bottom category, the rocks, the stones, that which cannot move, what's called in Hebrew domem. Then above that, you have the category of tzomeach, the plant life, which grows. Then above that, you have the category of the chai, animal, which is higher than the plant life. It can move around, it can, it eats, it sleeps, and all that. And then you have the category of mankind, which has this aspect of daat, a certain level of consciousness that you don't find in the lower, a certain aspect of vitality. Remember, consciousness, vitality, chayim, life energy is all synonymous with daat, as we spoke in the past couple of class. That's the aspect of daat. And so that's what you find in the highest of those four categories in mankind. Now, a rock, there's no way that you can confine a rock. You cannot limit a rock because a rock doesn't have much potential. It's a rock. So what, are you going to shred it, make it into sand, break it up? Okay, fine. We'll give you that. A plant as well. Okay, yes, you can confine it a little bit. You can give, whatever space that it's growing in, you can make it a smaller space, but it doesn't have so much potential to do much more than just grow in its space. So based on its limited potential, you're also not able to limit it much more than just kind of confining its space. When you get to an animal that can go and run free, to whatever degree it can do that, you can limit it much, much more. And that confinement would be much more painful to the animal than if you kept a tree in an enclosed space. Now, when you move up to a human being, a human being not only grows, eats, grows, takes the sunshine, water, but not only moves around, can go out there, can walk, but what is the real potential of a human that is different than the animal life? And that's the potential in consciousness, of learning, of growing in consciousness, knowledge, wisdom, understanding, creating. That's where the human being has much greater potential than all the other categories. And so if you allowed a human being to run free and eat and drink and do whatever it wants to do as the animal self, but you limited its ability to grow spiritually in consciousness, then that's the greatest pain. That's the greatest limitation. That's the greatest confinement. And so when Hashem took us out of the slavery to the Egyptians, to Paro, and we became quote unquote slaves to Hashem, that's not slave. Basically, Hashem made sure that we would definitely be most 100% aligned with our ability, our true power to actualize our divine self, our godly self, our godly potential. And so, yes, it's through the Torah and the mitzvot, but that's not confining, that's not limiting in any way. That's empowering. These are methods of channeling that higher self, that best version of ourselves. These are methods of manifesting our divine self. And so that's the greatest freedom that there is, because then you're allowing your soul to soar freely, to really be what it's meant to be. That's what Maslow meant. What one must be, what one can be, one must be. Meaning that there is a gap. There's always a gap between where we can be, what we can accomplish in life, physically, spiritually, mentally, emotionally, all of these different aspects, elements. Parts of ourselves that we can actualize, we can grow to its full potential. And when there's a gap between that and where we are right now, that's where all pain, all frustration, guilt, shame, apathy, despair, and all the other limited emotions from the lower vibrational frequencies, from the scale of emotions, well, that's where they reside. And so a person is never going to be truly happy until they're truly actualized, completely actualized. That's the gap. The gap is the source of inertia and frustration and all the other types of limiting beliefs and thinking, whatnot. And Hashem gave us the ability to step out of our limitations, our smallness, and to step forward into our bigness, the big version of ourselves, that big divine self. It is expansive, limitless. And so what is this mindset shift? It's moving from a feeling of being a slave, a victim to our limitations, a slave, a victim to Paro and Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim, as we've explained in the past, the word in Hebrew means literally limitations, Meitzarim, constrictions, and moving into our actualized higher self, and moving as that actualized higher self towards the becoming of that actualized, of that perfect self, becoming that in its complete manifested state, in its complete actualized state. So what we want to do is close that gap between what we could be, where we could be, and where we are at. And that's the first step. How would you summarize for yourself this segment, this insight? What was your number one takeaway from this? I'll give you all a moment. 30 to 60 minutes. It doesn't have to be a whole paragraph. It could be a sentence or a word or two. Okay, the next part of this is how? Where are we drawing this gadol energy from? Where are we drawing this miracle energy from? And there's a very amazing Torah in the Likutei Moharan, the first part of the Likutei Moharan, 250, Reish Nun. Rebbe Nachman explains to us the secret of earthquakes. You were all asking a couple of weeks ago. I wanted to wait for this class to reveal the secret of earthquakes. And it's all in connection to the Shabbat HaGadol. There's a very interesting, in the Talmud in Masechet Brachot. The Talmud in Masechet Brachot says, there's a story. The Gemara asks, "My zvaot." What are zvaot? The Mishnah is speaking about something called zvaot. There's a certain blessing when there are zvaot. What are zvaot? Amar Rav Katina. Rav Katina says, "Goha." It's an earthquake. Okay, so the Gemara tells us a story to illustrate some point, some deep point. And the Gemara says, Rav Katina. There was a rabbi named Rav Katina who was traveling on the way, and he came upon the house of a witch, a sorcerer, who was, his specialty was doing sorcery and witchcraft with the bones of the dead, which is prohibited in the Torah, right? Baal Ov. Okay. At that time that he was traveling and he came upon this house of this witch or whatever, there happened to be an earthquake. And so he thought it was interesting, why not ask this man what he thinks about it? He told him, with all of your witchcraft and sorcery, could you ask the dead, what is the earthquake all about? Where do earthquakes come from? He said to him. So his answer that came forth through his witchcraft and sorcery was the answer, was, Katina, I would expect you to know better. You don't know the answer to this? Katina, Amar lo yadana. Why don't you know? Okay, so it must be something that's really known. What does he say? When God remembers his children who are exiled among the idol worshippers of the world, he there are two tiers that come forth, two tiers, and they fall into the great ocean, Yam HaGadol. Remember these words, key words. The ocean is called the Yam HaGadol, same word. And the noise, the sound of Hashem's voice, I guess, crying or whatever, is heard from one end of the world to the other end of the world, and that's what causes earthquakes in the world. So Rebbe Nachman explains what is going on here. What are the tiers? What is that representing, the tiers? And what is this big ocean? And how does that help the situation? And so he goes and he explains basically that that's what this Shabbat HaGadol is, the solution to the pain and the suffering of being lost at sea, so to speak, among the idol worshippers of the world. Why are we lost at sea in that big ocean, that big sea? Why is that called the big ocean, the big sea? And so he explains something very interesting. He says this is the main point of the pain of our exile is the lack of daat, that it creates a lack of daat. It conceals daat. And we explained this in the past classes, but this is something, a theme that comes over and over and over again in the teachings of Rabbi Nachman, Baal Shem Tov, the Arizal of the Zohar. So it's all about daat. Exile is the lack of daat. So he says, where's that daat? Where's that lack of daat coming from? Okay, so we're exiled among the idol worshippers, but what does that have anything to do with it? So he says, well, when you're living among a society that the way that they understand their mindset, their perspective on the world and how things work is cause and effect. It's all about nature. It's all about this force and that force, and you got to learn how to manipulate this, and you have to learn how to manipulate that. Then you begin to believe in that in the same way. And you lose your connection to true emunah and true daat, to your true power. What's the point here? That you're going from a feeling of you're going to a place of thinking that you're the victim to outside and other circumstances, instead of recognizing your true power as a creator in this moment. Your power as a creator in this moment is your power of daat. And so that's where this all begins, he says. Right? They learned from them, from the idol worshippers, to think that the reason for things is astrological signs. The reason for things happening is just coincidence or some other forces that are seen or forces that are not seen. And when we fall into that way of thinking, then we are in exile. And that's the source of all of our suffering, is that victim mentality, is giving your power away to the outside world. So what's the source of all of our suffering? This is what you would write down for this point right here, right now. I'll give you a couple of seconds to write that down in a sentence or less. What's the source of all of our suffering, of all of our exile, of all of our pain, all of our limitations? Exactly. That's exactly it. And so Rebbe Nachman says, so what does Hashem do in order to save us from our exile? When Hashem has compassion, the compassion is revealed to save us, to deliver us from our exile, to create an end to that end. If you remember, we spoke about the secret from the Zohar that comes up over and over and over again, the two ends, Ketzah Yamin and Ketzah Yamim, the end of days, the end of life, the end of the planet, the end of all that, and ending, which is what happens when you live from the perspective of time as being just a continuation of what was. Or what happens when you live constantly as a creator, creating more and more of that divine version of yourself. That ending has no ending, but that ending has no ending because it causes an ending to all endings. And so Ketzah Yamin is not an ending. It's an ending of your limitations, and therefore it's an eternal. You're constantly opening up more and more of that expansive state, that bigness that you are, that greatness that you are. If in this moment you're just as much big as you were a moment ago, then that's not really tapping into the energy of big. Every moment you need to create that big you in a way that relative to the moment ago, this is big. And relative to a moment ago, the next moment is big. You're always channeling that big expansion. If you're just a continuation of the big of the moment ago, you're not really living. You're still living in limitations. And so that's the Ketz HaYamin. It's the end of the limitations, moment by moment by moment. Releasing, letting go, and embodying that big version of you, that miraculous version of you, that divine version of you. And so what does Hashem do to create the end to the ends, which is the beginning of all beginnings, the expansion that always creates more and more expansion, constantly creating more and more expansiveness. Hashem brings this light from where? From the end of the world. In the end of times, there will be a revelation of this daat, of this consciousness in the universe, because that's really where everything is leading to. That was the purpose of creation. And so at that time, so imagine, so to speak, as if Hashem is taking that consciousness from that time and that space, time traveling, although Hashem doesn't need to travel. Hashem is, all of time is within Hashem, but drawing it from that consciousness, from that time and that space, that energy, and we can all do this. That emunah that will be revealed then, right? This is the end outcome that we speak about in the first pillar. Envisioning that version of me that I will be, that already exists. And that's the end of the world, your tachlit, your end outcome. And Hashem draws that here and now, within the sea of chaos, that big sea that feels so big that it's overwhelming and people, they give up. And within that place, Hashem draws these two tiers. There's a compassion, there's an empathy, there's of that drawing of the tears. What are the tears, says Rebbe Nachman? The tears are drawn from the eyes, and the eyes are all about looking forward. It's all about that enlightened state of creating that vision. The eyes is all about hashgacha. It's recognizing that as you become aware, as you envision yourself free, as you envision yourself the best that you can be, you're able to create that. And those tears are a concentration of that energy of the hashgacha, that Hashem is always watching over us. Divine providence is called hashgacha, always taking care of us. Everything in our life is for our benefit. And there's always this power of tapping into that geulah, that personal geulah. And that light, that consciousness, is something that each and every one of us, we can tap into. That consciousness, that emunah, that vision. So the question here is, how, from where are we channeling that emunah? And how are we channeling that emunah? What is that power that creates the miracles? It's that vision. And we channel it by imagining it and by stepping into it. And that's the next segment here. What we want to focus on now is, how do we do that practically? And in the Seder, we'll see that there are all of these elements are brought forth and practically applied. In the Seder night, we read the Haggadah, and in the Haggadah, we speak about the story of being slaves in Egypt. And at a certain point, it says, Vayitz'aku el Hashem, and they cried out to Hashem. So there's an aspect of crying out, tza'aka. there's actually a segula that when you come to these words to say it with all your power. And imagine crying out to Hashem, screaming out, just crying out, not from a place of victimhood, but we're going to speak about exactly what energy are we coming from. But the point is to focus on that aspect where you feel the most limited in your life, where you feel most constricted, most confined, most a victim to certain ways of thinking. You've created yourself a victim. In which ways have you made yourself a victim the most in your life? And when you cry out from the stomach of that darkness, there's a verse in Eov that says in Yonah, Mi beten sheol, is it Eov? Mi beten sheol shivati, I cried out to you from the stomach of the pit of the darkness. From the pit of the darkness, I cried out to you. Mi beten sheol shivati. And so when I'm able to experience that darkness, that lack, and I cry out from that place, what am I showing? I'm showing that there is no complacency here. There is no apathy here. That's a cry of willingness to survive. It's when a person is unable to speak words because words escape them in that place of darkness. And all they can do is cry out for help, and to cry out to affirm that you're alive, to affirm that you're not complacent, that you're not only not dead, but you haven't given up. And that's the first step. It's a refusing to be complacent, refusing to get stuck in apathy, refusing to stay a slave to those limitations. And crying out is an expression of that to Hashem. Crying out is an expression of a child that doesn't know how to speak or communicate, but is in a need for something. And they're not just going to be quiet. This is what they need. And so they cry out for this support. And so this awakens the mochin. This awakens your consciousness, Rebbe Nachman explains. In Torah, Rebbe Nachman has a Torah where he speaks about this. 20 in the Likutei Moharan, part 10. Until part 10. Torah 20 in the Likutei Moharan, Torah Chaf. Rabbi Nachman says that this is also the reason why our tradition, we read the Haggadah out loud. Everyone would chant out loud. The point is you want to raise your voice, channel your voice, your inner voice, your powerful voice. Channel it. And this is a way of awakening consciousness to what is possible. So you're not complacent, you're not asleep, you're not in apathy, you're not in despair. You're crying out and saying, hey, I believe in myself. I want out. Hey, let's move forward. Let's get out of this place. That's the first step, is recognizing the gap between where I can be and where I am, and making that gap so severe, so great, that you can't live with it. I cannot. I'm not complacent. And now you can move into the place of channeling the Emunah. Now you move into the place of channeling the Emunah. If you remember, when we came to the sea, the splitting of the sea, the first step was crying out again, Vayitzaku el Hashem. And they cried out to Hashem. And Hashem said to Moshe, why are they crying out to me? Tell them to move forward into the sea with trust and confidence, with courage, with emunah, envisioning the end outcome, envisioning the salvation, envisioning the song of the miracles, singing for those miracles. And that's what leads us to this next point we're going to get into right now. But beforehand, let's take a moment to stop and reflect on how you would summarize this segment, this most important insight or takeaway that you got from this segment. Okay. And finally, what's the last element of this formula? There's an excellent insight from the Rebbe of Chernobyl, the Meor Einayim of Chernobyl, in Parshat Tzav, where he speaks about Pesach. Every year we come back to this. This is one of the greatest fundamentals in creating miracles. And he says like this. He says, the Gemara tells us, the Zohar, and I quoted actually part of it before. Pesach is the Zohar says Pesach udro'a yamina, the right arm, right? We said that the right arm is the sphere of Chesed, and then the Zohar it continues to say, V'ha'ihu benisan nigalu benisan atidin nigael, and he says, and this is what our sages meant when they said in Nisan they were redeemed, they were delivered from their exile, the first one, and in Nisan they will be redeemed. They are destined to be redeemed from the final exile in Nisan as well. And so he explains that if we know that from the Medrash, we also in the Zohar we mentioned before that the Jews were not really on the highest spiritual level. There's a tradition that says, there's a Medrash that says that we were in the 49th gate of impurity. And Hashem needed to take us out that moment, and if not, God forbid, we would have gotten to a place of no return. By the way, interesting footnote on that from the Orach Chaim, Rabbi Chaim ben Attar. And he says that by the final exile, we will get to a place even beyond the 49th gate of impurity, and yet we will still be imperturbable to that and be able to easily return. Why? Because now in this exile, we already have the power of the Torah with us. We already are receivers of the Torah. We receive the Torah, and with the power of the Torah consciousness, even having descended beyond the 49th gate of impurity, we are imperturbable to that, and we're able to be freed from that, free ourselves from that, and create personal redemption and collective redemption. A footnote. And so he explains, if we were on such a lowly place spiritually, and as we mentioned, the angel of the Egyptians that said, hey, why are you saving this nation and drowning this nation? They're also idol worshippers. And he says that their answer to that, how are they delivered from the exile, the Egyptian exile, if in Mitzrayim they were also on that level? A week later, at the sea, they were on that level. So when they left Egypt, they were also for sure at that level as well, the 49th gate of impurity. Not a very high spiritual place, and yet in that night, in one moment, from one place to the next, from one moment to the next place, they emerged in a completely different dimension. How? Where did that rapid transformation, how did that take place? And so the Meor Einayim says that in Mitzrayim, the Jews practiced something very, very, very powerful. The night of the Seder, the night of the 15th of the month of Nisan, the Jews practiced the night of the Seder before they had what to celebrate, before they left Egypt. The verses in the Torah say this clearly. They made the sacrifice, the offering, the Pesach offering, and they sat and they were all sitting. They had the Seder. Not only, says the Meor Einayim, eating the Korban Pesach, but also with the glasses of wine and the matzah, the 4 kazait of matzah, the matzah, eating the matzah. And what else? They read the Haggadah. They read the whole story of the deliverance from the Egyptian exile, even though it had not yet taken place. Imagine that. They sat there, all of them, right in the middle of Egypt. No miracle. I mean, you have the 10 plagues, but nothing yet has taken place of the deliverance. And they sat there and they had the whole Seder, as we do this year and every year, celebrating and speaking about the whole idea. The whole mitzvah of this night is all about speaking about, praising Hashem for these tremendous miracles, even though they had not yet occurred. A lot of them had not yet occurred. And in this way, they channel the chesed, says the Me'or. They channel the chesed energy, which is the miracle energy, as we explained, the energy of gadol, that expansive state, those expanded consciousness states of what's called gadlut hamochin. What is gadlut hamochin? Expansive consciousness. There's constricted consciousness and expanded consciousness. It's this consciousness of that expansive state, the limitlessness that you are. And by celebrating it, by acting as if, beginning to see themselves, feel themselves, as the Haggadah says, in every generation we are commanded to see ourselves. Chayav Adam lirot et atzmo, to see yourself as if you personally emerged, has been delivered from the Egyptian exile, from your limitations. Imagine yourself experiencing right now, today, your personal redemption. And begin to act that way. How? By speaking the praises, the celebrating of that win. There is part of the Haggadah, we speak about these Tanaim, these rabbis from the Mishnah, that were spending the whole night of the Seder speaking the praises, lisaper, speaking the praises of these miracles, speaking the praises of Hashem who delivered us from these limitations, from this exile, from that pain, from that suffering. Until the morning, it says. Until their students came to them. Well, it doesn't say until the morning. Until their students came and said to them, rabbis, it has come to the time of, it is now the time of reading the Shema of the morning. Meaning that it's morning time. Okay. But the way that it's said is very interesting. If you look at the words, I invite you to look at the words of the night of the Seder and the Haggadah. You'll see that l'saper, to speak about Yetziat Mitzrayim, about these miracles. When you speak about the miracles, the word l'saper, which means literally to retell, recount a story, but it also means in Hebrew from the word sapir, which means to make bright, to shine, to illuminate. L'saper means to illuminate. And so a deeper meaning of those words in the Haggadah is that these rabbis, by speaking the miracles of the redemption within the darkness of the night, what they were doing is they were illuminating the night and causing the night, which represents judgment and concealment and constriction and limitation, they were turning it into a day, into the Kriyat Shema, the reading of the Shema, which is the Emunah, the belief and the trust in Hashem, the Enod Milvado, consciousness of the morning. Morning is the aspect of Avraham, the aspect of revelation. And that's what we do the night of Pesach, is we experience a night that has the light of day. What does that mean? That means that gap that you experience, that you think, that you feel yourself to have between where you could be and where you are at, that gap is the darkness, it's the limitations, it's the constrictedness. It's your Mitzrayim. And imagine for a moment if all of that were completely flipped around, so that night is experienced as day. How? By channeling the day, the morning of Abraham, the Emunah, of the end of darkness, the end of the world. Where does Hashem draw that Emunah from? Those tears. Rebbe Nachman says, from the end of the world, that light that's going to be revealed at the end of all the ends, at the end of all darkness. And that's the morning, right? The end of the night is the morning. It's not just the end of the night, it's the beginning of the day. It's the renewal. It's the manifesting, the channeling of that emunah. And that's what we do by speaking the miracles and celebrating them. But I will highly recommend that you don't take this as the way people usually take manifesting techniques, and that is, well, if I say enough affirmations in this way and these times and whatever standing on my head, then it'll manifest. Or if I visualize this, whatever, then I'll manifest what I want. Or if I celebrate the fulfillment of the materialization, the manifestation of my intention, if I celebrate it now, so then it will manifest. That's not the way I want you to approach this. That just turns it into another strategy. And strategy thinking, trying to manipulate reality in order to get what we want is turning away from the recognition that what we want is already always available to us right now and right here within ourselves. We are not the victim to outside circumstances and forces. When we choose to be what we can be, when we choose, bechira is always daat, we choose to channel that best version of ourselves, then it becomes possible. It's all about the choice of moving forward in that direction as that version of you. And so the first step is tzeaka, crying out. And you can do this silently. You can cry out silently and also awaken your consciousness from a place of sleep and complacency and apathy to a place of being awake and aware and motivated and ready and willing, owning your power, your ability to be free and to move forth, to channel and embody and create that best version of yourself moment by moment by moment. The first step is that crying out. You can do it silently. It's a meditation. We mentioned this in the past. Rebbe Nachman says you can silently cry out a cry that goes, he says, from one end of the world to the other end of the world. He says this in a different place, but listen to the way he's framing it. A cry that can be heard from one end of the world. It goes from one end of the world to the other end of the world. What does that mean, from one end to the other end? From the ultimate end of complete concealment, complete block, complete helplessness, to complete redemption. That's what it means, from one end to the one end. These are the two ends. Remember the two ends. There's one end which is complete limitation, the end of all life. And then there's the other end, which is the end of all ends, which is the complete beginning of all beginnings, moment by moment by moment. And so when you implement that cry, you're awakening your mochin. You're awakening yourself. Now you're focused. You're motivated. I'm no longer complacent. I'm no longer in that place of apathy or grief or guilt or shame or fear or worry or anger, all that stuff that comes from victim mentality. I'm no longer a slave. I'm no longer giving my power away to these outside, everything outside from my best version of myself is outside of truly what I am and who I am. And then Hashem says, move forward. And that's what we did. Well, and we did it proactively, that morning energy of Abraham, that proactive channeling the emunah and creating that reality for ourselves, deciding that this vision is not just a fantasy. I am committed to making it real. And so we make a Seder. What's the Seder? Seder means an order. And the way the Maharal of Prague explains that there's an order of nature. There's a way of living with a mindset, an order of nature, cause and effect, and has all these limitations and all that. And then there's an order of miracles that Hashem created in the world. It's a whole different path, a path of manifesting miracles. It's a whole different way of living. And that's the order, the Seder of Nisim, the night of Pesach, in the darkness, in the night in Mitzrayim, we sat and we did the Seder of Nisim, the order of creating miracles. How? By celebrating the miracle before it even happened, before it was completely materialized. By speaking the praises of Hashem, thanking Hashem. So what's the main difference here and how you don't want to practice that? Visualizing and speaking the miracles, and how you do want to practice that is that when you're visualizing, you see, you can come to your, let's say, your hitbodedut, your meditation, your journaling, and you can sit there and think to myself, well, Rabbi Bitton spoke about in the class how if I speak about thanking Hashem, for example, for the fulfillment of materialized intention, for the fulfillment of materialized miracle, then that's going to cause it to be manifested. So let me do that now a little bit. Let me imagine it. And I start thinking, thank you, Hashem, for all of this, the physical health that you have blessed me with, and how you solved this problem for me. And now I'm living healthily and happily. And these are the experiences that I have in my life that are different and how they're different. And thank you, Hashem, for all of this financial abundance and for helping me to get to the next level financially and help me to grow and to grow in this way and to grow in that way and accomplishing this intention and that intention. But what I want you to do instead is I want you to imagine yourself thanking Hashem as the person that already has that experience. I want you to imagine that you're traveling in time and space into the version of you that already is experiencing firsthand the fulfillment of this intention, the fulfillment, the materialization of this miracle. And how would that version of you thank Hashem and express this gratitude? So all the while, you're not doing it in order to cause that to happen. You're doing it as if it has already happened. That's the main point of distinction here in how you approach these processes and these exercises and these meditations. Okay. And so I'm going to give you a couple of half a minute here to summarize this point for yourself, this segment. In a sentence or two, or a couple of words. And what was most valuable for you from this? Greatest takeaway? Okay, so let's quickly recap the main points of what we spoke about today in this Pesach, this Miracle Pesach workshop. How to create miracles in your life. We spoke about the main mindset we want to move out of in order to experience the deliverance from your Mitzrayim. And that's the mindset, the victim mindset. The feeling of being a slave to all of these forces, to all of these reasons that we tell ourselves why we can't have what we want to have, why we can't be what we want to be, what we can't do, why we can't do what we want to do. And moving into your power, moving into your freedom. We spoke about how that's the aspect of Gadol, miracles, that goes beyond worthiness, beyond all of the cause and effect, all of nature. We move into that place of nurture, that we can actually become what we want to become, create, be an empowered creator of your reality, instead of always complacent and trying to keep yourself safe and quiet and small, moving out, moving forward, stepping into that greatness, that big version of yourself. We spoke about how what's most important in all this is recognizing that what one can be, one must be, the gap. And then we spoke about where do we draw the power to close the gap? From where do we draw that power to close the gap? And that's the power of emunah, where you're drawing the consciousness of that future, of the end of the world, the end of the limitations, right? The beginning of all beginnings, that highest version of you. You're drawing that hashgacha, the consciousness that Hashem is always with us, inseparable. There's no separation, not outside, but we are within Hashem, and there's nothing separate. And all there is that perfection, moment by moment by moment. And I'm able to channel that to inspire confidence, to inspire courage, to move forward in life each and every day, in every action step. And then we spoke about how to practically apply this mindset and this consciousness. And we spoke about the elements of crying out, where you're affirming that you're alive within all of this. There's life here within this darkness. That even though there's so much darkness, I cannot speak and I don't know what to do and how to move forward. But there is life here that is not complacent, that is refusing to stay in that stuckness. And we're turning to Hashem from the end of the world, crying out that call from the end of the world, from the place where you feel completely limited, completely constricted, completely held back, completely victim, and piercing through that to the other end of the world, so that you can create that channel, that open channel between where you are and what you could be. So you're able to begin to channel that here and now. And that's what you do in the second part, which is the whole Seder of Nisim, speaking the miracles, celebrating the wins, celebrating the miracles as if they're already happened, and beginning to see yourself, embody that version of you moment by moment by moment. The proactive power of Chesed, of Abraham, of the morning, of moving forth. And that's what we want to do. We want to experience the night of the Pesach Seder as day. Laila kayom ya'ir. The night will be illuminated like the day, as it says in the prophecy of the final redemption. And so each and every one of us, this is your journaling exercise for the week, is to ask yourself, how can I apply these insights, this formula, the mindset shift, each of these points of shifting in mindset, in perspective, and the practical application, in order to close the gap, in my greatest challenge currently in my life, personally, so that I can experience personal redemption. And how might we do it as a nation, collectively? How might that look like in the world or as a nation? That's for bonus points. But begin to imagine, seeing, experiencing all of us in redemption. And here is the bonus insight. Rabbi Pinchas of Koretz says this. He says that we have a Gemara that tells us that Mashiach will come, and Mashiach ba'ela behetzach daat. Mashiach will come with a releasing of consciousness. What does that mean? Behetzach daat. And so he explains that in order for a miracle to take place, you need to transcend the space of duality. And that what that means is that this is all the secret of the third pillar that we explain in Lev Emunah therapy. What that means is that you need to cause a unification. A unification is that there are two bodies that become one. So you're transcending duality. Right? That's what unification is. When we speak about the unification in the spiritual realm, Kabbalistically, all of the abundance that is drawn into this world, that's manifested, that's created comes from a unification in the higher realms. World, that one dimension, we do certain actions, we say certain words, and we align in consciousness to cause a ripple effect throughout all the dimensions above us, unification. So whatever duality experience there may be on those spiritual realms, we can't even understand what that means, is dissolved into just oneness. And when there's that unification, there's a sweetening that takes place, and it allows for birth, continuation of life, of that shefa, of that light, of that miracle to be manifested. And so the final redemption will be the same way. And he says that every miracle needs to have this unification. And so a bigger miracle needs a greater unification. So the great miracle of this Shabbat is that on this Shabbat, there is a great unification. There's a great potential for transcending duality. And this is all of this, he says, is basically, which is letting go. You want to get to a place where you dissolve your perception of the gap, and you're able to feel the place of ayin, the place of oneness, the place of enon milvato, where all there is no longer the me and the story, the me and the you, the having and the not having. There just is the beingness. That's complete oneness. And it's almost like a moment of you're completely letting go of that story of the gap, that story of the lack. And that allows for a space to be created for you to now begin to channel the light practically through your day-to-day application, channeling of that best version of you, moment by moment, in every action step. And so how would you take a moment to summarize that bonus insight for yourself? And as soon as you do, in a minute, we'll go into a short meditation to end off this wonderful workshop. And so when you're ready to, begin by focusing inward and just allow yourself to become more aware of what you're feeling, of your images. Welcome the images that are floating around, any awareness of noises, images, or sounds from the outside, sensations, feelings, physically from the outside. It might be your feet on the ground. It might be noticing your posture, noticing the energy in your body, noticing any sounds or any images on the inside, and any sensations, your general state of mind. And as you allow yourself to become comfortable with your awareness of what is, begin to focus on what would be of greatest value for you if you were to change and fix and solve this issue, this number one issue in your life. What issue, if it were solved, would be the greatest transformation, would cause the greatest transformation in all areas of your life and be of greatest value for you? What would really allow you to become the best version of you in the greatest way? If you could not fail, if you were open to infinite possibilities and all was possible for you, and just allow yourself to notice not only the images and the sounds that come up with that, but what are your feelings about those images and sounds? Notice any apathy, any despair. I can't have that because, or I can't be that right now because, or I can't do that today because, and just welcome what comes up. Welcome those aspects of limitations, limited ways of thinking, victim mentality, being under the control of this and being withheld because of that, being limited in this way and being blocked in that way. And what does that feel like? Welcome that energy, open up to it, relax to it, and begin to scream from within the depths of your soul. Just allow that voice of a calling, just calling out from your heart, calling out so loudly that it pierces through all of the layers of blocks. It's kind of like a certain vibration to that crying out, to that calling out. And it's a vibration of life and living, a refusal to die, a refusal to be complacent, a refusal to give up. Is calling out from within that despair, from within that darkness, from within that hopelessness, from within whatever reasons you think you have that are justified for why you cannot be that ultimate version of you. And just allow that call from your heart, that cry, that scream from your heart to vibrate and pierce through all of those layers of darkness, all of those layers of night and judgment and unworthiness, all of those layers of confusion and chaos. And till it reaches the other end of the world. The other end of the world is the soul of the world, the beginning of all beginnings that is always available right now and right here, the beginning of all possibilities, the point within which everything is possible and because of which everything is possible, the infinite possibilities, infinite potential that is available to me right here and right now. And notice when that cry, that call reaches that end of the world, it is always present here and now. Allow that cry to create an open channel between where you could be, who you could be, completely actualized, and where you're at and who you are today. And if there's any stress or any anxiety or any other emotions that come up, any fear, any worry, any doubt, any pushing and any pulling, you can just allow that to pop up and pass through. So that what you're left with is a clear and open channel from the point of you, completely actualized you, completely successful, the winning you, the victorious you, the you that created perfect world on a personal level and collectively for our nation and for the world. That perfect you, that fearless, courageous, perfect you, that superhuman, divine version of you, that big version of you, that biggest version of you. And we move into the next phase of channeling that practically. How can I allow myself to feel what that version of me feels like if I were to channel that feeling and that mindset and that state of consciousness right here and right now, today in my life. How would that influence my choices from now until when I go to sleep tonight? What choice will that influence the most? And what will my choice be instead? That empowered version of me chooses differently, chooses how will I create a perfect reality today? What is the number one thing that will make the greatest difference for me in the next 24 hours if I were to choose to embody the energy of my best version and I were to choose to actualize that energy, to actualize that superpower, to actualize that divine state, that biggest version of you, that miracle version of you, to use that inspiration practically? How would I do that? And what would that look like? And how would I know when that's done? And just allow yourself to notice what that looks like and feels like. And to notice if there's any resistance to that, that you can allow to pop up and pass through. And you can even breathe with it, breathe around it, relax with it, and open up to that highest version of you, completely actualized. If you were to create your Seder of Pesach regarding this aspect, regarding this intention, what would it look like if you were currently celebrating those wins? If you were currently praising and thanking Hashem for this miracle as the version of you that has already experienced this miracle. So, not in order to create the miracle, but because it's already happened. What would that feel like and sound like and look like? And if you were to channel that power, that courage of that version of you, if you were to channel that optimism, that moving forward, that creator energy of that version of you, what would that look like for you practically in your life today? And just allow yourself to notice what comes up, to welcome those images and those sounds, and just allow it to be as effortless and as easy as it is, as peaceful, as pleasant, as inspired, and as motivated, and as effective as something that has already happened, is already done right now. You can allow this peaceful, pleasant energy that is invigorating, inspiring, empowering, healing, guiding light to surround you and support you and empower you and propel you forward. And as you do this, and as you allow this, and as you become this now, you can gradually allow your awareness to take a more outward focus. As you count yourself back up from 5 to 4, more energized, more inspired from 4 to 3, more excited about the optimistic energy that manifests miracles for you. From 3 to 2, more blessed, inspired, excited, blessed, healed, and experiencing the flow state as effortlessly and as easily as your beingness. From 2 to 1, feeling more awake and open to experiencing this light externalized, ready for this right now. Feeling comfortable opening up your eyes when you're ready to. Okay.